This is Gary Jordan from Natural Law for North America, and tonight I want to discuss with you a kind of an important situation we're going through. The large question is, what do we, as residents of the land area known as North America, between the current Canadian border, the Mexican border down south, and the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean, what are our choices as the corporate government, which is what we currently have, uh, slowly implodes and self-destructs? It's really getting to be quite the tale, quite interesting, and I'm glad I don't run it. But what are we supposed to do as residents? And not everybody wants to live in a land without a government. Some people are very understandable. It's a big step. It's a big step to go from no government to some kind of government. I mean, to go from some kind of government to a huge, humongous government to zero. That's a big step for a lot of people, and that's understandable. So, do we have options besides a corporate constitution, which have been trashed beyond recognition anyway? No, I don't. We do have choices, but they have been trashed beyond recognition, and it's not being followed. So even if you have fond memories of Schoolhouse Rock and all the fun songs about it, it doesn't mean anything. Did the European settlers do anything before that after the Revolution? Yeah, called the Articles of Confederation, and that is one very real possible option. Though, because of the differences between 1777 and nowadays, a couple hundred years later, it might be quite a bit of a stretch. So let's start off and ask ourselves, what is a confederation? A confederation is typically an agreement. It does not have to be in writing, although it can be. And in the case of the Articles of Confederation of 1776, it was. It is an agreement for mutual benefit of two or more tribes, usually tribes or super tribes, or super bands, large bands, usually much more than two, in which some authority was given up for that particular purpose. In the case of self-defense, was a very common one amongst tribal cultures. And you didn't have to, but everything else was kept within each tribe. And so in the case of the Articles of Confederation, each of our states, each of the 13 colonies, was called a state, which, as it turns out, and I didn't know this growing up, but it turns out they were considered nation states, the equivalent of today's Holland or Japan or North Korea or Somalia or whatever. They were nation states, Iraq or you name your favorite one, and they were considered that. And what these Articles of Confederation did is each of the 13 states went into an agreement with one another, and they wrote out, because they were very big on writing, they were big on common law, English Roman law, these articles, which were guidelines for how that confederation worked. What activities were governed by the confederation? And then everything else was up to the individual nation states, which we could look at a large tribe. And that brings, that'll get me to another point later. But that's what those are. And it can be anything. I mean, you could have self-defense, you could have scientific. Say a bunch of tribes get together and say, we want to monitor the water levels and the climate. Or we want to send satellites out into space and monitor the sun's weather. And we're going to have representative scientists from each of our tribes. I mean, it could be something like that. And you would have within the scientific sphere that is agreed to, you would have uh, the individual tribe would give up their control and authority on that uh, particular aspect. Self-defense, same thing. Um, so that's what basically how that works. That's what the basis of it is. It could be anything from scientific, larger than a tribe, intertribal science to self-defense. Some groups that have confederations did it for trade. Um, many things can be done with that. And the difference between that and a federation, which is what we have as a federal government, which is a federation, it's a corporate federation, but it still runs, and that is everything goes to the capital, Washington in this case. We're supposed to all the states, all the municipalities, the little cities and towns, and the counties, parishes, then the states, and then to the feds. And the feds have ultimate control. It's very hierarchical, very structured, and the cities and towns and even the states have very limited authority under a federated system. So that's the difference. In a confederation, everyone, the tribes and families would maintain their control for everything except for what they agree they need to work together with, and they would have representatives go for that and deal with that particular thing. So that's what that is. Now, the 13 states, as I said, the 13 colonies were considered nation states. So the way that worked was each state would give up a certain authority in the mostly trade and self-defense. Now, we are trying to transition, people like myself are trying to transition to natural law, which we would eliminate most of the jurisprudence and stuff like that that's in the original 13. We'd have to rewrite the whole thing. I spent some time reading it today. And we'd have to basically rewrite the whole thing. So that brings us to, if we're going to rewrite it, we might as well start from the ground up and ask ourselves some questions. One of those questions is, what would be the foundation of it? Do we want to keep the states that we have? We have 50 of them. But they're subsidiary corporations. So if we want to get rid of corporations, get rid of the corporate government, we got to do away with the states. The boundary lines on these are very arbitrary. My personal feeling is that, like I say, we want to transition to a world without government. But I say a confederation of some kind could be very useful and very helpful, because we will have other nation states still in existence. Mexico down to the south of us, Canada up north. I mean, those are our immediate borders on the territory we know as the United States. I mean, that will raise the question of what we want to call it, but we'll put that aside for a moment. What could be the foundation if we take away the states? A very real one will be tribe. Individuals will be the ultimate foundation of of a stateless society. So if we need a transition to that, individuals under natural law are completely sovereign within themselves, and they make and exchange relationship with one another voluntary. That includes marriages, what we would call marriages, what we currently call business, etc. There's the different arrangements, and so the foundation would probably be tribes and bands, because people would want to associate with each other, like-minded, to have similar rules, similar ideals, similar guidelines. I should say guidelines, but similar language, spiritual tradition, things like that. That's what often distinguished tribes. Even larger groups that were sort of mega tribes, and they had a bunch of very closely related tribes. They shared the same language. That brings me to an historical note. In in North America, I was reading a book about 8, 9 years ago, and it was talking about the human scale. And an interesting thing about North American tribes, I can't speak for other parts of the world, but in North America, the tribe did something very interesting. When they got to 120 persons within that tribe, they split like two cells. And then they would, build up to another, they would split apart and go slightly separate ways. Because they didn't want too big, because that would be unmanageable. So if we have tribes, we'll have all, hundreds of thousands of little tribes that work together. There's no reason you can't take and transition to regional, tribal councils, regional confederations, and gradually transition to something that's manageable. So to me, that would be the foundation, could be kind of a tribal thing. So what will be the function? What will be the purpose? Well, probably self-defense, because we do have large nation states, Canada, Mexico, just our immediate borders. Then you have the other large economic players. We would be transitioning from a world that is currently run on funny money, and the fiction of that goes around with that, stock bonds, all the rest of the promissory notes, buying and selling other promissory notes, that silliness that we've discussed before. We still have to deal with that. We still have to deal with international groups like the BRICS, the IMF, or any of those things that we would be disbanding, that are not under the direct control of the citizens, the residents. Well, self-defense would be a big one. Treaties, alliances, that might be something else. I mean, this is all shot in the dark. I mean, I hope a lot of people have discussions about it and ask themselves, what would be the foundation? What would be the tenets? I mean, I can't think of everything. But I do know we have to rewrite it, because it's mostly on defense, and we don't need a standing army. One thing I do know, we do not need to have a standing army and navy and all that. We need to get rid of the militarism, get rid of the corporations, get rid of the funny money. Within our borders, we can set up various barter trades and such. I also think that we should stipulate in any rewriting of such a confederation that tribes and bands have the right to migrate and to have migratory routes. That's one of the secrets of the Native American land management. Most tribes, very few were settled. North of the Rio Grande, very few were settled. And even the ones on the eastern seaboard that were, they were like, say, a couple of years, then they moved to another part of their territory, let the land they just got off of go fallow for a few years, and then do it that way. Most, however, had a more seasonal route. The Plains Indians were the most famous of them, and they had these large routes which they followed the buffalo. I think we would want to stipulate that families, tribes, bands, and individuals would have the right to be migratory, if that works for them. Because that is one of the secrets of healthy land, sustainable land management, is seasonal migratory routes. Even the smaller tribes did that, like the Ohlone and the other Pacific Central Coast tribes. Apparently that's what they did. So no part of the land would be overburdened, overtaxed, and the other parts would have a chance to be healed and to restore themselves. So that's just my take. Get rid of the armies, get rid of the navies, have a very limited amount of weaponry that might be necessary for self-defense, if we really even want to go there. I mean, there's so much to discuss. There's so many things that look around the family tables, around tribes and villages. And one other thing, we need to recognize the traditional leaders, not to be Bureau of Indian Affairs puppet, but the traditional leaders and the traditional tribes, and allow them, to the extent possible, to return to their tribal land, to return to their tribal lifestyles to the extent possible. And when we can help them to help restore that, maybe even participate. You know, who knows? Well, we have to honor the First Nations that the corporate America, the subsidiary to the London company, to the East India Company, because they never really gave up the profit. They never gave up the taxes. And that's the other thing, eliminate taxes. Is there a reason for us to be taxing, if we're getting away from a government? No. Maybe we have to have a limited tax, but very limited. I don't know. I would like to see us get rid of that. Um, Land management practices. Each tribe and village and band has the right to harvest water, to custodian land. If I want to, with a small band or even by myself, go off and take a piece of land and homestead it and care for it, I should have the right to do it. I shouldn't have to deal with a corporation or some absentee landowner that just wants it for the profit. Oh, this looked good on my sheet. I have X amount of land that's worth X amount of money. No, 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 no. That's bullshit. Pardon my language. That's bullshit to me. Um, and that we'll have to get rid of in due time, either immediately in the first round or if we transition. And I actually honestly see a transitioning from one confederation. That's the other thing. It needs to be stated that this is in no way permanent. This is in no way a perpetual confederation. Individual tribes and bands can leave it without disrespect unless they're hurting somebody as needed. We'll obviously have to figure out, we'll have to restructure the confederation to any of the articles to deal with natural law rather than corporate and common law. We will have to decide how we will deal with fugitives. Maybe we should, just simply expel them and say, go your way and be gone. As long as you're not hurting anybody, just go your way. If they are, really dangerous and violent and hurtful, maybe we do need to incarcerate them, but maybe we just simply exile them. That's just what most cultures do. But you are not to come back. Else you're a dead man or woman. And that's the other thing. If we do have a representative government of some kind, like a Confederate Council or a Congress like the original, the women of the tribes and families need to choose the male. If they want to, we want to have male representatives. That's fine, but the women are the ones that are the. As far as I'm concerned, I just think that it's so cool that the women in Native American, in reality, were almost all in truth matriarchal, because they're the ones that bear the children, they're the ones that raise us, they're the ones that have all the responsibility. They should be choosing, and the community needs to have the right to say, no, you're not behaving yourself. You no longer represent us. Goodbye. Go back to your private life. And we need to have structures that allow it to do that, so that we don't have to have people like what we have in now representing us that are absolutely, and voting isn't it. Because voting doesn't really do anything. Because all you do is just buy votes. That's all that's happening now. Votes are being bought. Well, I could go on for a couple more hours, but I won't. So you all have a nice night. You have plenty to think about, but the Articles of Confederation are a possibility to transition us out of our current society and out of our corporate government. Well, bye for now, and good night. Happy St. Patrick's Day.